Essay number 16, 8 cognitive biases that are creating the way you experience your life. Here's something that's going to mess with your head. Your life is probably nothing like you think it is. The reality you're living in, the one that feels so solid and real and objectively true, it's mostly made up, not by some external force or conspiracy, but by your own brain. And the really unsettling part is that everyone else is doing the same thing, living in their own made-up version of reality, convinced that theirs is the real one. Nobel Prize-winning psychologist Daniel Kahneman put it perfectly when he said that the confidence people have in their beliefs isn't based on the quality of evidence, but on how coherent a story their mind has managed to construct. In other words, we don't believe things because they're true. We believe things because they make sense within the story we're telling ourselves about our lives. This isn't some New Age concept. Ancient Greek philosophers were wrestling with this thousands of years ago. They called it naive realism. This assumption that we see the world as it actually is, that our impression of reality is objective and accurate. But here's what a century of research has revealed. There is no way you can ever know objective reality. Everything you've ever experienced, every moment of your life has happened inside your skull. You've never actually experienced the world directly. You've only experienced your brain's interpretation of it. Psychologist David McRaney explains it like this. We all still believe that even if our senses aren't perfect, once we get to thinking and feeling, those thoughts and feelings are reliable. But we can never know how much of our subjective reality is a complete fabrication because we never experience anything other than the output of our own minds. So if we're all walking around in our own custom-made realities, what exactly is shaping them? That's where cognitive biases come in. These are the psychological patterns that distort our thinking without us even realizing it. They're like Instagram filters for reality, except we don't know they're on and we can't turn them off. Let me walk you through 8 of the most powerful biases that are literally creating your experience of life right now. First up is projection, and this one is fundamental to everything else. Because our only experience of the world is through our own senses and psyche, we inevitably project ourselves onto everything we see. The world isn't as it is, it's as we are. When you're depressed, the whole world looks depressing. When you're in love, everyone seems beautiful. When you're angry, you notice conflict everywhere. We assume everyone thinks like we do because our internal narrative is all we've ever known. If you're someone who's always on time, you can't understand people who are chronically late. If you're naturally optimistic, pessimists seem broken to you. We overestimate how normal and typical we are, and we judge everything else based on our own internal experience. You're not seeing other people as they are, you're seeing them as you are. Then there's extrapolation, which is what happens when we take our current moment and project it onto our entire life. Having a bad day becomes, my life is terrible. Feeling happy becomes, I've finally figured it all out. We make sweeping assumptions about what our current circumstances mean about us as people, and then we believe things will always be the way they are right now. This is why heartbreak feels like it will last forever, and happiness feels so fragile. When you're in pain, your brain extrapolates that pain into the future indefinitely. When you're happy, your brain immediately starts worrying about when it will end. We're constantly taking temporary states and treating them like permanent conditions. Anchoring bias is particularly insidious because it happens so early we don't even notice it. We become overly influenced by the first piece of information we receive about something. Your worldview is probably mostly your parents' worldview, not because you consciously chose it, but because it was the first one you encountered. When someone tells you what salary to expect in your field, that number becomes your anchor, regardless of whether it's accurate. This is why first impressions matter so much. It's why the person who makes the first offer in a negotiation has such an advantage. Once that anchor is set, everything else gets evaluated in relation to it. You're not making independent judgments. You're making comparisons to an arbitrary starting point that might be completely wrong. Now let's talk about negativity bias, which explains why you can't look away from car crashes, why bad news travels faster than good news, and why one criticism can ruin your whole day despite 10 compliments. We're not just being dramatic or pessimistic. Our brains literally give more weight and attention to negative information. From an evolutionary perspective, this makes sense. The person who ignored potential threats didn't survive long enough to pass on their genes. But in modern life, where most of us aren't facing actual survival threats, this bias just makes us miserable. We have limited attention, and our brain insists on spending most of it on what could go wrong rather than what's going right. Conservatism bias is anchoring's close cousin. It's not just that we're influenced by the first information we receive. We actively resist changing our minds, even when presented with better information. We believe something more simply because we believed it first. This is why people stay in careers they hate, relationships that don't work, and beliefs that no longer serve them. The familiar feels true simply because it's familiar. Think about how many of your beliefs you've never actually questioned. How many things you know simply because you've always known them. Your brain treats familiar ideas like old friends and new information like suspicious strangers, even when those strangers have better credentials. The clustering illusion is when your brain starts playing connect the dots with random events. You decide to buy a certain car, and suddenly you see that car everywhere. You learn a new word, and everyone starts using it. You think about someone, and they text you. Your brain is desperately trying to find patterns because patterns mean predictability, and predictability means safety. But here's the thing. Most of these patterns don't exist. They're just random occurrences that your pattern-seeking brain has decided must mean something. This is how superstitions are born. This is how conspiracy theories take hold. This is how we convince ourselves that the universe is sending us signs when really we're just experiencing statistical probability. Confirmation bias might be the most well-known, but that doesn't make us any better at avoiding it. We selectively pay attention to information that confirms what we already believe and ignore or dismiss information that contradicts it. We don't do this consciously. Our brain does it automatically, like a bouncer at a club, only letting in thoughts that are on the guest list. This is why two people can look at the exact same event and come away with completely opposite interpretations that both confirm their existing beliefs. It's why political arguments never change anyone's mind. It's why you can always find evidence to support what you want to believe. Your brain isn't looking for truth, it's looking for confirmation. Finally, there's choice supportive bias. Once you choose something, a job, a partner, a political party, a phone brand, you immediately start seeing it more positively and actively ignoring its flaws. This isn't just post-purchase rationalization. Your brain literally changes how you perceive things based on whether you chose them. This is why arranged marriages can be just as happy as love marriages, why people become irrationally loyal to brands, why you defend your choices even when they're clearly not working out. The act of choosing something fundamentally changes how you experience it. You're not just choosing a thing, you're choosing to see that thing in the best possible light forever. Here's what all of this means. The story of your life that you're so sure about, the personality you think you have, the world you think you live in, it's all being actively constructed by these biases and dozens more like them. You're not experiencing reality. You're experiencing your brain's heavily edited version of reality. And everyone else is doing the same thing. That person who drives you crazy with their wrong opinions, they're living in a completely different reality than you are, shaped by different biases, different experiences, different anchors and clusters and confirmations. They're not stupid or evil or intentionally difficult. They're literally living in a different world. This is why we struggle to coexist. Not because we're fundamentally incompatible, but because we don't understand that we're all walking around in our own custom realities, convinced ours is the real one. We're like people wearing different colored glasses, arguing about what color the world is. But here's the thing. Knowing about these biases doesn't make you immune to them. I could explain every cognitive bias that exists, and your brain would still be doing all of them right now, including finding ways to confirm that you're not as susceptible to them as other people are. That's just how brains work. So what do we do with this information? First, we practice humility. When you understand that your entire experience of reality is being filtered and distorted, you hopefully become a little less certain that you're right about everything. You start holding your opinions a little more lightly. Second, we practice curiosity. Instead of assuming someone is wrong when they see things differently, we can get curious about what biases and experiences might be shaping their reality. What anchors are they working from? What patterns are they seeing that we're not? What are they projecting onto the situation? Third, we practice flexibility. When you know your brain is constantly constructing stories and finding patterns that might not exist, you can start questioning those stories. Is this actually true, or is my brain just making it seem true? Is this pattern real, or am I creating it? Is this choice actually good, or am I just seeing it that way because I chose it? The reality is, you'll never see objective reality. None of us will. We're all stumbling around in our own subjective worlds, bumping into each other, trying to communicate across the gap between our different realities. But maybe that's okay. Maybe the point isn't to see reality clearly, but to understand that nobody does. Maybe the best we can do is remember that the life we think we're living is largely a construction of our own biases, and try to be a little more generous with people whose constructions look different from ours. Maybe we can find connection not in shared reality, but in the shared experience of not quite knowing what reality is. Your life is different than you think it is. Everyone's is. And that's either terrifying or liberating, depending on how you choose to see it. Though, of course, that choice is probably being influenced by about 17 different cognitive biases right now. Welcome to the human experience. It's weirder than you think.